You're safe now. Let's get you settled into your room.
It was a quiet evening patrol, the kind that blends into every other shift without leaving a trace. The city moved slowly under dim streetlights, and the police officer drove through familiar roads with routine focus, expecting nothing beyond the ordinary. Near an old bus stop, he noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a cold metal bench. She was not asking for help, not calling out, not even looking around. She sat still, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands folded tightly around a worn handbag, as if holding on to the last piece of her life. Something about her presence felt wrong, not dangerous, but deeply sad. The officer slowed his car, hesitated for a moment, then parked and stepped out. His boots echoed softly as he approached her, careful not to startle her. When he spoke, his voice was calm and respectful, asking if she was okay. The woman looked up slowly, her eyes filled with exhaustion and confusion, as if she had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to with concern. She took a long moment before answering, then said she was just resting. The officer could tell that wasn't the full truth. He stayed, not rushing, not pressuring her, simply standing there as the night air grew colder. Finally, she spoke again, saying she had nowhere urgent to go and nowhere that truly belonged to her anymore. Her words were quiet, but they carried years of loneliness. The officer listened, realizing this was not a routine stop but a moment that mattered. In that silence between them, something shifted. A simple patrol turned into an unexpected connection, one that neither of them understood yet, but one that would change both of their lives forever. The officer chose not to leave. That single decision, small and unremarkable on the surface, quietly changed the direction of the night. He sat down on the edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance, making sure his presence felt safe rather than intrusive. The woman seemed surprised by this, as if she was used to people speaking briefly and then walking away. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The sounds of the city filled the space between them, distant traffic, a passing siren far away, the hum of streetlights, but slowly, the silence stopped feeling uncomfortable. It began to feel like permission. Permission to speak, to exist, to be heard. The officer asked her name, not out of procedure, but out of genuine interest. She hesitated again before answering, her voice soft, almost fragile, as if saying her own name after so long felt unfamiliar. She explained that she had lived in the city most of her life, long enough to watch neighborhoods change, people come and go, and familiar places disappear. She spoke about her past in fragments, not in a straight story, but in memories that surfaced randomly. She talked about a small home she once shared with her husband, the sound of his footsteps at the door, the way evenings used to feel full instead of empty. When her husband passed away, the world didn't stop, but her life quietly did. Friends slowly drifted away, children grew busy with their own lives, and the phone stopped ringing. The officer listened carefully, never interrupting, understanding that she wasn't just telling a story, she was finally releasing years of silence. She admitted that she often sat at this bus stop because it reminded her of movement, of the idea that life was still going somewhere, even if she wasn't. As the conversation continued, the officer began to see how easily loneliness hides in plain sight. This woman wasn't homeless in the way people usually imagine. She wasn't loud or disruptive. She was simply forgotten. He asked gently where she planned to sleep that night, and she avoided his eyes, changing the subject. That answer, or lack of one, spoke louder than anything else. The officer felt a quiet heaviness settle in his chest. He had dealt with emergencies, violence, and chaos, but this felt harder in a different way. There was no law to enforce, no command to follow, only a human choice. He explained that he couldn't leave her alone like this, not because she was breaking any rule, but because no one deserved to disappear quietly. She resisted at first, pride mixed with fear holding her back. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to owe anyone anything. The officer reassured her, not with promises, but with honesty. He told her that sometimes help wasn't about weakness, but about survival. As the night deepened, the street grew colder, and the city lights flickered above them, the woman finally nodded. It wasn't a moment of relief, but of trust. And in that simple nod, a bond formed between two strangers, setting in motion changes neither of them could yet imagine. The ride through the city felt slower than usual, as if time itself had decided to move gently for once. The officer kept his driving steady, aware that this was not just a patrol anymore but a responsibility he had willingly taken on. The old woman sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window at streets she recognized but no longer felt connected to. Every passing building carried memories she did not speak aloud, places where life once felt full, now reduced to distant echoes. The officer broke the silence carefully, asking small, thoughtful questions, not to interrogate her, but to remind her that her voice still mattered. She answered slowly, choosing her words with care, as if each sentence cost her something. She admitted that accepting help felt frightening, not because she didn't need it, but because she had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't deserve it. The officer understood that fear more than he expected. He thought about the many people he had encountered on the job who were only one bad moment away from being forgotten. As they arrived at a nearby shelter, the woman hesitated again, her hand lingering on the door handle. The building looked unfamiliar, intimidating, and final in a way she wasn't ready to face. Sensing this, the officer stepped out first, walking around to her side, offering reassurance without pressure. He explained what would happen next, making sure she wouldn't feel lost or overwhelmed. Inside, the shelter was warm, quiet, and simple, nothing like the fear she had imagined. The officer stayed with her through the paperwork, through the questions, through the moments where her voice trembled and nearly gave out. He made sure she received food, clean clothes, and a place where she could finally rest without fear. Before leaving, the woman reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. She thanked him, not with dramatic words, but with honesty, saying that he had given her something she thought was gone forever, the feeling of being seen. As the officer returned to his patrol car, the city felt different. The streets were the same, the lights unchanged, but something inside him had shifted. He realized that this night would follow him long after the shift ended, not as a memory of duty, but as a reminder of why humanity mattered more than routine. Weeks passed, yet the night never truly left the officer's mind. It stayed with him in quiet moments, during early morning patrols, in the pauses between radio calls, and in the way he began to notice people he once would have driven past without a second thought. He checked on the old woman discreetly, never making it feel like charity or obligation. Each visit revealed small changes that carried enormous meaning. At first, she barely spoke, still guarded, still unsure whether this stability was temporary. Over time, her posture changed, her voice steadied, and her eyes began to carry curiosity instead of fear. Social workers helped recover her records, arrange medical care, and locate fragments of a life that had slowly slipped out of reach. The officer watched this transformation with quiet respect, understanding that real change never happens all at once. It happens in slow, fragile steps that can easily be undone if no one is there to protect them. The woman began sharing stories more freely now, not just about loss, but about moments of joy she thought had been erased. She spoke of cooking meals for her family, of laughter-filling rooms that now existed only in memory, of dreams she once had and never believed could matter again. The officer listened, learning how deeply neglect can wound a person without ever leaving visible scars. As he returned to his daily duties, he carried her story with him, and it changed the way he approached every call. He spoke more gently, waited longer, listened deeper. Other officers noticed the shift, and without speeches or instructions, small changes followed. More time spent checking on the elderly, more patience with those who struggled to explain themselves, more moments where compassion quietly replaced urgency. The woman herself began to reclaim a sense of purpose. She volunteered to help others at the shelter, offering comfort in the same quiet way it had once been offered to her. She became a familiar presence, not as someone in need, but as someone who gave. When the officer saw her smile for the first time, truly smile, it felt heavier than any award he could have received. It reminded him that the badge he wore carried more than authority, it carried responsibility for human dignity. Months later, when she finally moved into a small, modest apartment of her own, she invited him to visit. The place was simple, but it was hers. As they stood by the window, watching the city move outside, she told him that night at the bus stop had been the moment she decided not to disappear. The officer realized then that their chance meeting had not saved just one life. It had reshaped two paths, created a ripple that spread quietly but powerfully, and proved that sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones no one plans, no one records, and no one expects, but that change everything forever. Time moved forward, but the meaning of that chance meeting only grew deeper with it. The officer continued his work as he always had, wearing the same uniform, driving the same streets, responding to the same kinds of calls, yet everything felt different beneath the surface. He no longer saw the city as a collection of problems to manage, but as a fragile web of lives, each one balanced quietly between being noticed and being forgotten. The old woman became a steady presence in his thoughts, not as someone he had rescued, but as someone who had changed the way he understood his own purpose. She, too, carried the impact of that night into every new day. In her small apartment, she created routines that gave her life structure again, simple things like morning tea by the window, short walks through familiar streets, and conversations with neighbors who slowly began to know her name. She kept a chair near the door where she would sometimes sit and think about how close she had come to vanishing without anyone realizing. That thought no longer frightened her. Instead, it reminded her of how fragile life could be and how powerful a single moment of care could become. The officer and the woman met occasionally, never formally, never with ceremony, just two people whose paths had crossed in a way that could not be undone. Their conversations were unhurried, filled with reflection rather than urgency. She told him how being seen that night had given her permission to want a future again. He told her how listening to her had made him a better officer, not because he followed rules more closely, but because he learned when to look beyond them. As the years passed, their lives continued to unfold separately, yet permanently connected. The city changed, as cities always do, but the bench at the bus stop remained, worn and unnoticed by most. Sometimes the officer would drive past it and remember how close the world had come to losing someone quietly. Sometimes the woman would pass by it on her walks, no longer sitting there, but acknowledging it with a glance that carried both pain and gratitude. Neither of them spoke publicly about what happened. There were no headlines, no awards, no recognition. And yet, the legacy of that meeting lived on in countless unseen ways, in how the officer treated strangers, in how the woman offered kindness to others who felt invisible, and in the subtle shifts they caused in the lives around them. In the end, it was never about a cop or an old woman. It was about a moment when one person chose to stop, and another chose to trust. It was about how a single act of humanity can quietly rewrite the future, proving that even the smallest connections, formed by chance and guided by compassion, can change everything forever.